Imagine boarding a private jet, a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, only to be told, in no uncertain terms, that you don't belong, not because of who you are, but because of how you look. What would you do if the crew denied you your rightful seat, and you were the owner of the entire airline? This is the story of Miles Redding, a calm and powerful CEO whose quiet dignity is put to the ultimate test, 38,000 feet above the ground. As the clock ticks and tensions rise on board SolAir Private Flight, SA-177 questions ignite in every passenger's mind. Who truly holds power when appearances are deceiving? Can justice be served quietly in a world that often shouts? Watch closely as Miles refuses to be erased or silenced, turning an ordinary flight into an extraordinary battle for dignity, equality, and change. Are you ready to witness what happens when quiet strength confronts deep-rooted prejudice? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support stories that reveal the truth and inspire change. Let's begin. Sir, this seat is for SolAir priority guests. The flight attendant's voice was polished, professional, and sharp enough to slice the calm air of the first-class cabin. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words did all the cutting. You may want to check with the gate. Coach is in the back. The man standing in front of her didn't flinch. He glanced at the seat number printed on his stub and then back at her, not with defiance. Just a patient kind of confusion. I believe this is my seat, he said quietly. It wasn't just his voice that was calm. Everything about him was: his dark gray jacket, worn at the elbows, his navy slacks, slightly rumpled, his shoes clean, but scuffed at the sides. He looked like someone who belonged in the back row of a tech seminar, not in first class on a $4,000 private business flight. That's what the attendant saw. That's what she decided. And that's when everything started around them. The cabin was hushed. The kind of hush that isn't peace, it's permission. Permission to judge. Permission to assume. Permission to ignore. A man in the next row, mid-50s, silver cufflinks, skin the color of burnished brass, leaned forward with theatrical annoyance. He shoved his leather briefcase farther into the center aisle. Let's keep this area clear. Shall we? He muttered. Then, more directly to the attendant, some of us pay for silence. She didn't respond, but her posture changed slightly straighter, slightly smug. She turned back to the man in question. I'll need to verify your ticket, sir, she said, extending one hand, palm up. He offered it without resistance. A beat passed, then another. She stared at the stub as if it were written in a foreign language. Then she narrowed her eyes. This says priority access, but it's not logged in our system. She handed it back with 2 fingers, like it might stain her nails. I'll ask you again to take your seat in the rear cabin, or we'll have to get security involved. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked at the seat 1A, then back at the woman in front of him. Then he sat down, calm, deliberate, like the seat had always been his. Across the aisle, another passenger shifted in his chair. Younger, early 30s, wire-rimmed glasses, a quiet air of intelligence. He tilted his phone downward, already recording. The man in 1A didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to care. His name was Miles Redding. He wasn't a janitor. He wasn't a mechanic. And he wasn't just a passenger. He was the reason SolAir Private existed. He had founded Redding & Co., holding 16 years ago with nothing but a half-patented cabin design and a laptop with 3 missing keys. Now, he owned the parent company of the very airline he was being asked to leave. But none of that showed in his clothes, or his voice, or his stillness. This flight wasn't an accident. It was a test. A silent audit of how his staff and his system treated people when they thought no one was watching. Except this time, someone was. From her desk at corporate headquarters, Raya Collins saw the signal. A light tap on Miles's smart ring had triggered Protocol 1. She didn't need instructions. She just whispered one word to herself as she opened the compliance dashboard. "Here we go. Back in seat 1A. Miles exhaled softly. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But something shifted behind his eyes. Not rage, not fear. Something quieter. Something colder. Conviction. And the flight hadn't even left the runway. He didn't shift in his seat. Didn't ask for an apology. Didn't pull out credentials to prove his worth. Miles Redding just sat. But beneath that still surface, his mind was moving like weather. The murmur from the rear cabin barely reached him. A child giggled 2 rows back. Someone popped open a can of ginger ale. The world kept going, unaware that something fundamental had just cracked beneath the surface of this flight. Claire Monroe, the flight attendant, walked off with an extra sway in her step. She thought it was handled. Handled. That word echoed in his mind. It was always the word they used when they swept things aside. Handled meant you didn't look the part. You made people uncomfortable. We corrected you quietly. For a moment, Miles closed his eyes. He remembered the conversation with his mother back when he was still in high school, before the suits, before the tech firm, before the jets. She was folding laundry, her hands moving in rhythm, her eyes locked on him. "You're going to walk into rooms they think weren't built for you," she'd said. "Don't waste time proving you belong. Just build your own room." At the time, he hadn't understood it. Now, he lived by it. Next to him, Silas Trent had gone back to tapping on his phone. His platinum SolAir badge shimmered under the LED cabin lights. He leaned over toward the aisle and muttered, just loud enough for Miles to hear, "Nothing personal. Friend. But first class has standards." Miles turned his head slowly, not in confrontation, but in curiosity. And Silas froze, just for half a second. There was something in that look, something that didn't belong to a janitor, or a coach passenger, or a man accidentally in the wrong seat. It was the look of a man who knew more than he said, who built things in silence, and moved mountains without asking permission. Silas cleared his throat and looked away. Across the aisle, Noah Elridge was still recording. His phone was angled low, lens half hidden behind the seat ahead. He didn't know the man's name yet, not officially. But something about this didn't sit right. He'd flown enough to know the signs. The false politeness, the forced smiles, the subtle tightening of rules that only seemed to happen when someone looked like him. Noah didn't post right away. Not yet. He needed to know what he was seeing. He zoomed in slightly on the man's hand steady, folded in his lap. No tapping, no fidgeting, just control. And Noah thought, he's not just some guy who bought the wrong seat. He's waiting for something or someone. Back in the cockpit, Captain Dana Rowe adjusted her headset, annoyed. "He's still in 1A. "Yes," Claire answered through the comm. "He claims it's his seat. Did you verify the manifest? I didn't see his name. Just a priority ticket, but it wasn't in the system. Then log him." Dana's voice was clipped. "We're not delaying departure over some manifest mix-up. Mark him unauthorized. I want this cleared before pushback." Her tone was confident. Too confident. The kind of confidence you develop when your bias hides behind protocol. Meanwhile, at Redding & Co. headquarters, in a quiet security suite just outside Atlanta, Raya Collins opened the internal dashboard. A red icon blinked at the top right corner, Protocol 1 activated. Flagged instance cabin 1A, Flight SA-177. She took a breath. So it's starting. She clicked into the live feed log. Everything was being recorded. Not just video audio, ID scans, seating assignments, crew dialogue, and every single entry would now be preserved. Raya tapped on her headset. "Helena," she said. "Speaking to legal. He's in place, and they've already logged him as unauthorized. Without ID scan, without anything. Just sight." "Copy that," came the lawyer's cool reply. "We proceed." Back on board, Miles glanced toward the window. Not at the sky, at the reflection. His own face, faint and ghost-like in the glass. There was a time when that face hesitated, when it tried to explain itself, to prove its right to sit, to build, to lead. But not anymore. Now, when they looked at him with doubt, he waited, because doubt was only dangerous when it went unanswered. And today, it would be answered in full. There's something about leather and metal that makes a statement without speaking. Silas Trent knew this. He adjusted the position of his briefcase again, firmly pressing it into the table between seats 1A and 1B as if claiming the air itself. He glanced sideways, not directly at Miles Redding, but just enough to register him. "You know," he said casually, voice syrupy with condescension. "These seats aren't just about comfort. They're about culture, environment, expectation." He smiled, small and smug. Miles said nothing. The silence between them was thicker than the cabin air. Claire Monroe, the flight attendant, returned holding a tablet. Her shoes tapped lightly on the polished floor, but her posture had stiffened. "Sir," she said, "I'll need you to vacate this seat immediately." She didn't blink, didn't shift her tone. "This seat is reserved for SolAir Platinum passengers only. You're not on that list." She held up the tablet like it was scripture. Miles looked at it, then at her. Still not angry, still not defiant, but she flinched anyway. "Do you always verify seating based on names?" His voice was quiet, but each syllable felt heavier than metal. Claire hesitated. "We scan badges," she replied. "Yours wasn't scanned. You didn't ask me to." Silence. Behind her, Captain Dana Rowe emerged from the cockpit. She had the look of a woman used to being obeyed, not questioned. Sharp shoulders, pressed uniform, a voice like frost. "What's the issue?" she asked. Claire pivoted, relief flashing across her face. "He's refusing to relocate. Not on the Platinum Manifest. No badge scanned." Dana turned to Miles, sizing him up the way you might assess a suitcase left unattended. "Sir, I'm the captain of this flight, and I'm asking you clearly now. Do you have a valid reason to be in that seat?" Noah Elridge felt his hands tighten on his phone. He was still recording, still watching, still unsure if he should intervene. But something in Miles's posture made him pause. Not just calm, deliberate, as if the man was measuring every insult, every assumption, and storing them somewhere deep. Noah's instincts as a travel journalist told him, this isn't just a misunderstanding. This is a test, and they're failing it. Miles reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a folded boarding stub. He handed it to Dana. She took it between two fingers, glanced briefly, then frowned. "This is a standard issue. Priority ticket, no platinum mark. This doesn't entitle you to seat 1A. She snapped it back toward his chest. "Security will be notified if you don't return to your assigned section." He didn't react. He didn't even reach for the stub as it fluttered into his lap. "You see," Silas muttered, not bothering to lower his voice, This is why pre-screening matters. You never know who's going to wander in here and bring the property values down." Claire stifled a laugh. And that's when something changed in Miles. His hands moved not quickly, not dramatically, but with intention. He reached down, lifted the stub, folded it carefully, and slid it back into his coat. Then he tapped his ring. Once, at that exact moment, across the country in the SolAir command suite, Raya Collins saw the shift in data. A second ping. Protocol escalation. She spoke into her headset. "Miles just sent a level 2 signal. We're moving into active audit." Helena Morrow joined the line. "I want all cabin interactions archived, every camera angle, every audio channel, and pull the staff history for Rowe, Monroe, and Trent." Trent, Raya asked. "He's a passenger." "Yes," Helena replied, "but he just became part of the problem." Back on board, Dana was growing more agitated. "You are delaying departure, Mr. She trailed off. She didn't know his name, didn't bother to ask. Miles looked up at her. "You've logged me as unauthorized, based on nothing but appearance." He gestured calmly toward Claire's tablet. "You haven't scanned a badge. You haven't verified identity. You made a judgment, and you acted on it." Dana's jaw tightened. "This is standard protocol." "No," he replied. "This is standard prejudice dressed up as policy." A sharp inhale from one of the passengers. Someone had spoken a little too plainly for comfort. Noah posted his first message to X. "Flight attendant at SolAir refuses to verify ID. Assumes passenger in 1A is not priority. No scan, no name, just judgment. I'm watching this unfold. Stay tuned." His phone buzzed. Notifications exploding like sparks. Dana turned back toward the cockpit. "We're flagging this man. If he doesn't comply, we remove him." Miles leaned back, quiet. But inside, the storm had begun. Power doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it begins with a tap. And that's all Miles Redding had done, gently pressed the underside of his ring. A tiny, nearly invisible motion, but 2,000 miles away. It was as if thunder rolled through the walls of Redding & Co. Holdings, in a secured control room overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Raya Collins' screen turned blood red. "Level 2. Override initiated." "We're live," she told the team. "Lock external access to SolAir's flight controls." "Isolate command loop." "Done," replied an engineer. "Satellite pings are tracking Flight SA-177 in real time." Raya tapped a key. The cockpit's audio feed opened. Captain Dana Rowe's voice came through clearly, sharp and irritated. "I need that man off my aircraft. We cannot delay pushback any further." The control room listened in silence. Then Raya spoke softly. He gave them a choice. They chose poorly. Back on board Flight SA-177 turbulence wasn't in the air. It was between the rows. Passengers were starting to notice. The woman in seat 2C whispered to her husband, her eyes flicking between Silas Trent's smug grin and Miles' stillness. "That guy isn't panicking. He's not even blinking," her husband muttered. Noah Elridge refreshed his X feed. His post was now climbing into the thousands of shares. He stared at the man in 1A calm, still, deliberate. Who is this guy? And why does it feel like the airline just stepped into something it can't walk back from? Captain Dana Rowe stormed back into the cockpit. Slamming the door. "We've got 5 minutes before this delay becomes a reportable offense. This isn't about race. It's about order." First Officer Garrett Lind, younger, quieter, turned to her. "Then why didn't Claire scan him?" "We didn't need to. He doesn't have the platinum badge. But you didn't ask his name. Why would I need his name? We have protocol. Garrett looked at her, brows slightly furrowed. Yeah, but if he's someone important, and we mess this up, then it's on him to say so. Dana's voice cracked with defensiveness. Garrett leaned back, but he knew something didn't sit right. He'd flown too long to ignore his gut. Down below the plane, in the operations tower, a senior dispatcher tapped his headset. Captain Rowe, this is Control. We're seeing a slight inconsistency with the manifest system. Stand by before taking further action. Dana's eyes narrowed. What inconsistency? No answer. The line had gone cold. In the cockpit, her panel blinked. Command override FLT 177, priority lock, manual reroute pending. What the Garrett turned slowly. That's not possible unless someone above SolAir is pulling rank. Back in first class, Claire Monroe returned. Again. But this time, her smile had cracks in it. Sir, we've spoken with Control, and they've asked us to verify your credentials after all. Miles met her gaze. Now you're asking. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't loud. It was measured. The kind of voice that carried weight because it didn't ask for permission to exist. Claire hesitated, then offered a tablet. You can scan your boarding pass or SolAir credential badge now. Miles took his phone from his pocket. He tapped once. A gold screen appeared. He held it up. Claire's eyes widened. SolAir Diamond Executive Internal Ops Tier. She blinked. Then again. The screen wasn't just marked Diamond. It bore a symbol that staff almost never saw. Redding & Co. Executive Authority. Clearance Black. Her mouth opened. But words didn't come. Silas Trent, now noticeably pale, leaned forward. So, you're an employee of SolAir. Miles turned his head slowly, his eyes steady. No, I own the parent company. The words were simple, but they detonated in the air like thunderclaps. Claire backed away instinctively. Passengers around them whispered loudly. He owns the airline, wait-like. The owner, Noah Elridge's jaw dropped. He started typing furiously. Update passenger in 1A is not only authorized, he's Miles Redding. Yes, that Miles Redding. Redding & Co. Holdings. Owner of SolAir. And they tried to move him. In the cockpit, Dana stared at the screen now flashing. Executive override in progress, await instructions. She looked at Garrett. Get me SolAir Central Dispatch. Now. Garrett paused. Dana, I think you should just apologize. She glared. Excuse me. You judged him without asking a single question. You didn't check ID. You didn't scan his badge. You made a call based on how he looked. She turned away, but the silence in the cockpit was louder than any accusation. Miles Redding didn't say I told you so, didn't shout, didn't gloat. He simply sat, and the world shifted around him. There's something about being wrong in public that makes people perform apologies like theater. Captain Dana Rowe wasn't used to feeling small, not in the cockpit, not in uniform. But right now, as she walked down the aisle towards seat 1A, every step echoed a little too loud. Passengers were whispering. Cameras were recording. Her co-pilot had refused to speak to her. She paused just behind Claire Monroe, who had shrunk into herself ever since realizing the man she'd brushed off wasn't just a high-value flyer, but the owner of the airline. And the company that owned the airline. And probably the software in the flight dashboard. And maybe the chair she was sitting on. Captain Rowe knelt slightly, her voice tense. Mr. Redding, I've been made aware of the situation. It seems there was a misunderstanding. Miles didn't look up. He was reading a passenger safety card. Calmly. Quietly. like nothing had ever happened. Rowe's jaw tightened. We'd like to offer you a formal apology and assure you this was in no way personal. That made him lift his eyes. Of course it was. She blinked. Excuse me. It was personal, the moment you didn't ask for my name. His voice was soft, but the entire cabin heard it. And everyone froze. Silas Trent, still seated one row away, let out a nervous chuckle. Captain, I think we can all agree it was just a little mix-up. Miles turned toward him, and Silas stopped. You speak very loudly when you think you're in the right, but now that you're wrong, your voice is cracking. Silas swallowed hard. Dana shifted. Mr. Redding, we'd like to offer you a complimentary voucher. He raised a hand. No. She paused. No to your voucher. No to the pageantry. No to the idea that you can wrap this in protocol and walk away clean. His words weren't angry. They were deliberate. And that made them land harder. Back in row 4, Noah Elridge was typing fast. Captain just offered the CEO a voucher to clean up an act of prejudice. He said no. Calm. Clear. Didn't even raise his voice. Most powerful person on the plane, and he's teaching them all something without lifting a finger. Miles turned again to Claire, the flight attendant. She looked down. Ashamed. I don't hate you, he said softly. Claire looked up, eyes glassy. But I hope you think about this. Every time someone takes a seat and doesn't look like what you expect. She nodded once, tightly. I will. At that moment, Raya Collins, still watching from the headquarters control room, spoke into her comm. Activate full reroute protocol. Lock Dana Rowe from future long-haul assignments. Begin preliminary report filing with HR. I want her grounded for formal review. A beat passed, then her voice hardened. We're not going to bury this. Not this time. Captain Rowe turned to retreat. But before she left, Miles spoke again. Do you know what the most expensive thing on this flight is? Captain. She turned, confused. I assume the aircraft. He shook his head. It's my silence. And today, I'm not selling it. Across the cabin, someone clapped once, then another, and then a ripple of quiet. Steady applause swept through the plane. Not for spectacle, but because something true had just been spoken and it echoed in people's bones. Miles Redding didn't bow, didn't smile, didn't nod. He returned to his seat, folded the safety card, closed his eyes, and waited. The cockpit door locked with a soft click that felt louder than thunder. Inside, Captain Dana Rowe stood rigid, staring at the flashing screens. The news ticker scrolling live on the display was impossible to ignore. Breaking SolAir, CEO denied first-class seat. On own flight incident sparks outrage. Her hands clenched the edge of the console. She wasn't just captain. Now she was at the center of a storm bigger than any turbulence she'd ever flown through. Back in first class, the cabin was no longer quiet. Phones were out. Voices were low but urgent. And in seat 10. Miles Redding sat poised. No flinches. No anger. Only that steady calm that made people lean in closer. Noah Elridge's video had just gone viral. His steady narration played across thousands of screens worldwide. Here's the moment SolAir's own CEO was refused his seat by his own staff on his own plane. Watch closely as protocol, or prejudice, plays out in real time. The video showed every second the boarding stub being dismissed, the briefcase shove, the refusal to verify, the captain's clipped orders. Silas Trent looked around nervously, realizing he'd become a symbol of something ugly. Passengers whispered about his entitlement, the badge he flaunted, and the cold dismissal of a man who didn't fit their mold. Claire Monroe stood near the galley, her tablet in hand, sweat beading on her brow. She watched the live comments flooding in. Disgraceful. Unbelievable. This is discrimination in the sky. Her fingers trembled as she toggled between the manifest and the passenger logs. Knowing the truth was unraveling faster than any airline PR team could patch. At the back of the plane, First Officer Garrett Lynn shook his head. "This isn't how it's supposed to happen," he muttered to himself. He glanced toward the cockpit, where Dana was on the phone, trying to stem the rising tide. But it was too late. The tide had broken. Rhea Collins, still at headquarters, sent a rapid message to legal counsel Helena Morrow. Social media is exploding. Videos hit 3 million views in under 10 minutes. Media outlets are calling. This isn't a simple incident anymore. It's a reckoning. Helena's voice came back calm but firm. Prepare for an immediate internal investigation and pull the full complaint history on the crew involved. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifted again. Passengers who had been silent moments ago now spoke openly. A woman in 3B whispered to her husband. He sat there, refused to move, and they treated him like a stranger. A man in 4D shook his head. Imagine how many others get that treatment every day. Invisible. Ignored. Miles' eyes scanned the cabin. They weren't angry. They were watching, waiting, and then he spoke. Not loudly, not aggressively, just clearly. This isn't about one seat. It's about every time someone is told they don't belong in a room, a job, a plane, a world. His voice rippled through the cabin. This is a call for justice, not just for me, but for everyone they've tried to erase. The cabin erupted, some in applause, others in quiet nods. Noah Elridge lowered his phone. This was bigger than a viral video now. This was a movement. The cabin's silence was a fragile thread, ready to snap. Captain Dana Rowe paced near the cockpit door, her jaw clenched like iron. Her eyes darted between the passengers and the screen's flashing news headlines. She wasn't just fighting a passenger now. She was fighting the storm. First Officer Garrett Lynn approached quietly, his voice low but firm. Dana, this is spiraling out of control. We need to de-escalate. She shot him a sharp look. De-escalate. We're losing authority. I'm the captain of this flight. Garrett hesitated. Sometimes, the hardest thing to lead is yourself. Across the aisle, Silas Trent stood abruptly. His face was red, a mix of embarrassment and defiance. This whole thing is a setup, he barked. He's trying to make us look like fools. I demand this man be removed immediately. A hush fell. The passengers glanced nervously at each other. Claire Monroe stepped forward, voice trembling but loud enough for many to hear. We're here to ensure safety and comfort. When someone refuses to follow protocol, it disrupts that balance. Miles looked at her steadily. And when the protocol is weaponized against someone because of how they look, his words hung heavy in the air. Noah Elridge kept recording, sensing the moment was fracturing. He whispered into his phone's mic. This isn't just a racial issue. It's about power, control, and who gets to decide who belongs. Back near the cockpit, Donna's fingers twitched over the communication panel. She keyed the mic. Ground control. This is Flight SA-177. We have a disruptive passenger refusing to comply with seating protocol. Request immediate assistance. A pause. Then the reply came. Understood. Flight SA-177. Security teams are being dispatched. Miles rose slowly, his presence commanding even in the tight aisle. He spoke, voice calm but unyielding. I am not disruptive. You are the ones breaking protocol, be targeting me without cause." Passengers watched, breath held. Then Dana moved. "Security will escort you off the aircraft if you do not comply." A murmur rose. From the back, a voice cut through the tension. It was Malik Jordan, a young entrepreneur seated in 2B. "Wait a minute. You say he's disruptive? I've been watching this entire flight, and it's been the opposite." Heads turned. Malik's gaze was steady, fierce. "He's calm. He's dignified. And he's right." The room shifted. Dana's face twitched. Claire bit her lip. Silas scowled. Miles looked toward Malik and nodded once. "Thank you." At headquarters, Raya Collins watched the live feed, fingers flying over her keyboard. "Prepare for formal investigation. Notify Helena." In the cockpit, Dana slumped back into her seat, exhausted but defiant. Garrett sat beside her quietly. "We might be on the wrong side of history." The flight wasn't just delayed anymore. It was a reckoning. In the quiet moments between storms, a man wrestles with himself. Miles Redding sat back down, folding his hands calmly. But inside, a torrent churned. Could he have handled this differently? Should he have spoken up sooner? Was patience now a weakness or his greatest weapon? He glanced around the cabin. Some eyes met his with respect, others with suspicion, many with silent questions. He felt their weight, the hope, the doubt, the curiosity. In the cockpit, Captain Dana Rowe exhaled deeply, rubbing her temples. She was tired not just from the long flight day, but from the realization that control was slipping through her fingers. Back in first class, Malik Jordan leaned forward, voice steady but low. "Sometimes, the hardest seat to hold is the one you earn, not the one you're given." Miles smiled faintly. That line had stayed with him. A shift was coming. Not loud, not explosive, but undeniable. He touched his smart ring again, a quiet signal to the team on the ground. Time to rewrite the rules. Outside the airplane, the world was watching. Screens everywhere flickered with the same story: the CEO denied first-class seating on his own plane. Social media roared. News outlets scrambled. Hashtags trended. And the phrase, or Flight for Justice, spread like wildfire. At Redding & Co. Holdings, the boardroom was a storm of urgency and strategy. Helena Morrow, legal counsel, stood before the assembled executives. "This is no longer an isolated incident. It's a reckoning. We must act swiftly and transparently." Meanwhile, at SolAir Private's headquarters, Raya Collins coordinated the company's response. Prepare official statements, launch the internal audit immediately, and notify FAA and EEOC. This is about more than policy violation. It's systemic bias. Back on board, passengers watched the headlines roll on the cabin monitors. A woman whispered to her friend, "This is bigger than one flight. This is history." Miles remained composed. "The flight you are on has changed the course of this airline," he told the cabin. "But change isn't just about firing people. It's about transforming culture. Starting today, outside, protests gathered. Voices rose, demanding accountability. And inside, the SolAir crew faced questions they couldn't ignore. The CEO in 1A wasn't just reclaiming his seat. He was reclaiming dignity for all who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Investigations were swift and unforgiving. Within days, internal reports revealed a pattern. Captain Dana Rowe had over a dozen prior complaints, all quietly dismissed. Claire Monroe had altered passenger logs. First Officer Garrett Lynn was implicated in suppressing reports. And Silas Trent. His firm lost key contracts overnight. At the headquarters of Redding & Co. Holdings, Helena Morrow laid out the findings to the board. This isn't just a crew failure. It's systemic. a culture that tolerated bias and punished truth. Public trust hung in the balance, but Miles Redding stood resolute. We're not just firing people, we're rebuilding. He unveiled True Sky, an AI-driven system to monitor crew conduct, flag bias, and ensure transparency on every flight. Back on the plane, where it all began, the atmosphere had shifted. Passengers felt it. Change was no longer a promise. It was happening. Change doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in steps. Small, deliberate steps. Miles Redding stood before the gathered team at SolAir Private's headquarters. His voice was calm, steady, filled with purpose. We're launching the Zenith Equity Initiative, a commitment to fairness, transparency, and accountability. Every flight crew will undergo comprehensive training. Every passenger will be treated with dignity. In the cabin of Flight SA-177, new signs flickered on the screens. Zenith Equity Program. Active passengers noticed the change. Some smiled. Others nodded quietly. The future was unfolding right before their eyes. Outside, Malik Jordan accepted an invitation to join the advisory board of the new Redding Aviation Fund, created to open pathways for underserved communities in aviation careers. It's not just about flying, Malik said. It's about belonging. Miles watched it all with quiet pride. Not for headlines, not for applause, but for the legacy he was building. And as the engines hummed to life, the plane lifted off, not just into the sky, but into a new era. The cabin was quiet, but the air vibrated with something unspoken. Miles Redding stood tall in the aisle, the weight of the moment pressing gently but firmly on his shoulders. This wasn't just a flight, it was a statement. He looked around at the passengers' faces reflecting hope, relief, and the quiet strength of those who had witnessed change. Justice, Miles said softly, isn't loud. It doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it walks down an aisle calm, unstoppable, and undeniable. The screens around them displayed the Zenith Equity Program icon, a silver horizon line cutting through golden skies. It was more than a logo. It was a promise. Outside the plane, the world watched as SolAir Private began a new chapter one where luxury didn't excuse prejudice, and dignity was the true first class. Malik Jordan leaned over to Miles, whispering, "You didn't just fight for a seat, you fought for a future?" Miles smiled, the calm fire in his eyes shining brighter than ever. The engines roared to life. The plane surged forward, and with it, a legacy took flight. What we witness today is more than a story about a seat on a plane. It's a powerful reminder that dignity can never be dictated by appearances, and justice doesn't always shout sometimes. It moves calmly and unstoppable through the quiet courage of one person. Miles Redding's journey challenges us all to stand firm against discrimination and to build a world where no one is made to feel invisible. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories of courage and truth to light. Stay tuned for our next video, where we continue to explore stories that inspire, challenge, and change the world one moment at a time. Thank you for watching. Together, we can fly higher.